Walter, welcome to Talk here in Paris.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Reflex Aerospace, please can you give us background on the company, how you are financing it, and how's it going?
Well, yeah, Reflex is actually my second new space company, so I have quite a long history in the space domain. I studied aerospace science at the Technical University of Berlin and started then after failing my PhD ultimately. I started my first company, which is called German Orbital Systems. It's a CubeSat manufacturer, the first commercial CubeSat manufacturer in Germany. I then was also CTO at Exolaunch, which is a launch service provider, quite well known nowadays, and left both companies in 2021 to start Reflex. I'm convinced that there is, at least in Europe, no future for like commercial CubeSat manufacturing anymore. It's too simple product, too low margins, and so on. So we decided to focus on a more sophisticated satellite segment, 250 to 500 kg, high performance platforms for Earth observation, for communication, and everything around it, actually for almost every use case. We analyzed the market and found that there is just a handful of manufacturers in this domain, like Boeing, Thales, Airbus, OHB, like Lockheed potentially. And the products they have in this segment have one thing in common. This is a lead time, which is usually for a new project, if it's not just a recurrent manufacturing, it's like 4 to 6 years and more. While all the rest of the world, every other technology domain is becoming more fast-paced all the time, right? You throw away your mobile phone after 2 years, you exchange your car after 3 years. The satellites still have incredibly long innovation cycles, right? And this is the idea around which we formed Reflex. We tried to find means to design faster, to manufacture faster, and to ultimately serve the needs of our customers faster, right? And this is how with what we started to raise capital. We got the first pre-product investment in 21 from Alpine Space Ventures, which is the venture capital fund of Bülent Altan, who is one of the early engineers of SpaceX. And then subsequently we raised a seed round, which we are closing the second closing of the seed round this Friday, and in total 8.25 million, which makes the total funding up to 10 million right now. We will raise seed extension towards the end of the year in 4 to 5 millions, and this will be sufficient to get the first satellites up in orbit. We also have customers actually, so the first satellite we will be flying in October 24, with a customer, commercial customer, defense customer. Right.
Delivering bespoke satellite platforms faster than anyone else.
Yes, that's a tricky part, right? So obviously, if I tell a customer, what if you would get a high performance platform in 9 months instead of 4 years, and even cheaper, everybody would buy it, right? The tricky part is how to do it. We split our approach in mainly 3 parts. First is how to accelerate the non-recurrent design phase, right? Here we work with tools, some AI supported tools as well. In the end, we have databases of heritage design, new parts, and so on, and try to compose, preliminary design review ready solutions within weeks instead of months, right? Satellite we are working on right now needed only 60 man hours from the initial design towards till PDR readiness, right? Subsequently, this whole thing needs to be designed to detail, and the core part is software-defined avionics. So we try to shift the design complexity out of the hardware, we don't develop new hardware every time, we just develop new software, right? Here we also try to use things like software autocoding, automatic code generation, and other approaches to accelerate this process. And the last part, which differentiates us, for example, from competitors, let's say like Yorkspace or Aerospace Labs, which are somewhere in this more or less same region of mass, right? We don't focus on mega factories, we go for micro factories. We say every satellite is different, right? I have not seen in my life so far, and I've built 15 satellites of different sizes, I have not seen 2 identical ones. And it makes no sense to have this push fashion manufacturing approach where you have to produce, to put it on the yard somewhere and to sell then, one size fits all. You need always to individualize. So our approach to manufacturing is mass customization rather than mass manufacturing. And these 3 pillars combined give us the possibility to build tailored satellites, high-performance satellites, within less than a year from order to delivery.
Targeting customers from diverse domains, how is this strategy playing out?
Quite well, actually. First thing to understand is who is the ideal customer, right? The mega constellation, which everybody is talking about, is not the ideal customer for satellite manufacturer. Nobody who's sane in his mind would outsource the manufacturing of hundreds of identical satellites, right? It makes no sense, for example, right? We focus on customers where the number of satellites is not high enough, but the complexity of the individual platform is very high, so that outsourcing makes sense. So these are small to medium-sized constellations of 15 to, let's say, 50 satellites. And as a consequence of that, you have here Earth observation, Earth observation constellations like LiDAR constellations, for example, or communication constellations in medium or geo, but mainly medium, like things like SES, for example, the polar extension of their constellation would be an ideal customer, right? It's not all customer, but would be an ideal customer. We have quite a lot of traction, mainly from the Earth observation side of things, and from defense customers who are looking on signal intelligence, Earth observation, communication, and so I think that's a good strategy so far.
Yeah. Sustainability of space.
I think space is also our environment, right? So I guess from the philosophical point of view, we should name sustainability of space and environmental protection in one sentence, right? For me there is no difference between throwing garbage on the street and leaving non-functional satellites in space, right? So we commit to that, and every system we build has either an active or a passive deorbiting device. The first system will deorbit passively, and every subsequent system will have either a deorbiting sail or propulsion, right? I think that the mega constellations nowadays don't think enough about preserving this environment, and I also think that once the first mistake is done, then everything can be over pretty quickly, and I cannot do anything else but space, right? What shall I do that?
Big talking point, space traffic management.
Space traffic management is certainly something which is necessary, right? The only question is whether the European approach through over-regulation of everything is the right one. Okay, I guess like everything else in terms of regulation in Europe, it can also lead to simply killing the young little companies which cannot afford complying to all these regulative requirements. But also I think that simply relying on individual sense of responsibility is not playing out well right now. So we need to do something here.
Here at SciSat this week, IRIS² is on the agenda. What's your take on this, and as a startup company?
Well, I think there is definitely a point to secure governmental communication in a post-Ukraine war world. We need to cope with other challenges, right? For the terrestrial infrastructure, and relying on foreign solutions like Starlink is potentially not the right way to go. So there is something is needed. I'm not sure whether the approach the European Commission chose, like owning the infrastructure, is the right way to go. I also think that while writing the requirements, they simply wrote down everything they can imagine, and in the end they have a very bulky system which should be good for everything. At the end it won't be good for anything, right? I think it must be a much more commercially driven approach. I think combining what the idea behind IRIS² is to have a governmentally owned infrastructure and then to have commercial payloads piggybacking on that. I think it must be the other way around. It must be a commercial infrastructure which is designed in a way that governmental use cases can be implemented on it. And there are ways to do that. There are ways to segregate the traffic, to slice the networks, and to do all kinds of things. But Europe is simply not used to realizing projects like that. And we see with Galileo, we see with Copernicus and other projects that the European projects of this size are always much more expensive than anticipated, take much more time, and in the end are not even half as useful as anticipated. So if I would be the European Commission, I would rethink the whole approach. Yeah.
What next from Reflex Aerospace?
Well, we have big plans for sure. I think that there is a huge market gap in Europe in this segment, and I think that also with the potentially soon with the first successful flight of Starship, the satellite mass and the satellite won't be a design driver anymore, and satellite capability will become a design driver, and then we will be very good positioned to expand our business in Europe and then also towards the US in perspective. I think also that despite all my critical view on the IRIS² program, it still will be a motor for the ecosystem in Europe as well, and we are very well positioned to participate. So I'm very positive about the near, middle and long-term future of Reflex Aerospace.
Walter, thank you very much. We wish you every success.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.